Hi, Olvine. Ooh, Arkadelphia. Okay. Well, we're recording, so I'm going to get going. But welcome, everyone. This is our second Exercise Oncology webinar that we're having. And as I said earlier, you might have been logging on when I said this, but we have had such an amazing response for this Exercise Oncology Webinar Series. We now have more than 150 people signed up for this. And so we're so excited. And please feel free to share this with your friends, with your students, with your coworkers. We're trying to use this to break down the barriers and to get people interested and excited about the field of exercise oncology. And so please feel free to share this with everybody. I'm going to share my screen. So you all should be able to see that. And it's my assistant's birthday today, so she's unable to join this call. So I'm going to try to do my best to let people in as I'm lecturing, and hopefully I won't miss anybody. But today what we're going to do is we're going to look at cancer biology basics. And I think sometimes this topic can be a little bit overwhelming, especially for someone who's an exercise professional. A lot of times people will say to me like, well, I took exercise science because I didn't like biology, so I don't really want to spend a ton of time studying biology. But I do think it's really important for us as exercise professionals to at least have a foundational understanding of cancer biology and essentially understand, what is going on when someone when cancer is developing in an individual, like what is happening at the cellular level, how are the treatments impacting what is happening on the cellular levels, and then of course with exercise, how can we modify exercise, how can we prescribe exercise to mitigate some of the side effects and to help the patients who have cancer have better outcomes. And so if you're new to this field of exercise oncology and you're, just very curious about what it might be, the term exercise oncology, we really didn't have, at least use on a widespread basis until about 2017. So when I first started in this field back in 2003, we called it cancer rehab, but then we would get like, oh, well, it's not really rehab because we're not physical therapists, and it was very confusing. So Katie Schmitz in 2017 coined the term exercise oncology, and we're very happy that she did. So essentially, exercise oncology is the use of physical activity and exercise to enhance the lives of people with cancer and cancer survivors. So essentially, from the time of diagnosis onward, what we're doing is we're providing exercise oncology services to patient, whether they're in active treatment, whether they're in the survivorship phase. That's going to be our goal here. So the goals of exercise oncology are essentially to help patients participate normally in work and family and other daily life. And, when you think about the side effects from cancer treatment and the impact that it can have in someone's life, then very quickly that they're going to see a decline in their quality of life. And we have patients who are unable to work because they're so fatigued from their treatments. We have patients who are worried about not having the energy to go to their child's wedding, to participate in, family activities, and they feel like they're really missing out on things. And so being able to get them moving and get them to exercise really does help to increase their energy levels. It helps to alleviate the symptoms of treatment that they have. And it really helps them to improve their quality of life, really tangible effects on their quality of life. And, that's so important, especially when you think about cancer and about how much it takes from someone when we can give them the gift of being able to participate in their family activities and being able to work. And, we've had patients before that one lady said she was so fatigued that she could only go up and down 2 aisles of the grocery store. And then she would have to go sit in her car and rest because just walking up and down 2 aisles made her so exhausted. And so really the impact that we're able to have on patients is so important. And it really does help improve their quality of life and keep them independent as long as possible. So that being said, with that kind of as our why in wanting to learn what is going on at a cellular level when someone is diagnosed with cancer, when someone is being treated for cancer, that's going to take us into this idea of like what is actually going on at a cellular level. And so essentially, at the cellular level, there's certain things or certain structures that you need to be aware of. So we have organelles that are inside of the cell. They all have very specific jobs. They keep the cell functioning as intended. And then, of course, inside the cell, you have the nucleus, and inside the nucleus is where the DNA is stored. The DNA of the cell carries all of the genetic information for the body in the form of chromosomes. And so, as we study cancer and as we study what is going on in the cell when someone has cancer, it's going to require an understanding of DNA because essentially what happens is the DNA of the cell becomes damaged somehow. Sometimes this can be present at birth with a genetic abnormality. Sometimes it happens as a result of an exposure to carcinogens. Whatever the cause is, when cancer develops, it develops because the DNA in that cell is damaged. And so essentially what happens next is if hold on, I have someone coming in here. So essentially what is happening is the cells have this cycle of replication and of growth that it goes through. And so there's different phases of the cell cycle. You might remember this back from biology class, but the cell cycle is just this predictable series of events that takes place as the cell grows and as the cell divides. And so you have the G1 phase, which is the cell growth phase. This is the protein synthesis phase. You have the S phase, which is the synthesis phase. This is when DNA is replicated and it makes a copy of the chromosomes. You have the G2 phase or the gap2 phase. This is as the cell grows and prepares for mitosis. And then finally the mitosis phase or the M phase. And that's when the actual division of the cell takes place. And so this chart right here just kind of demonstrates what is happening as the cell cycle is, the cell is undergoing this cell cycle. So the interphase is this period where the cell grows and it copies its DNA. And the interphase is composed of the G1 phase and the S phase. Once there is an extra set of genetic material, that cell is going to organize and it's going to condense that genetic material before moving on to the M phase, which is when the cell then makes two copies of genetic materials into two daughter cells. And then essentially that cell cycle begins all over again. So if those two daughter cells are, needed for cell division to occur again, then they're going to enter the G1 phase. If no further division is needed, then that cell is going to enter the resting phase. And different cells in the body are going to replicate and divide at different rates. But it's important to understand this cell cycle because this is how a lot of our chemotherapy drugs work, is they're designed to go into the body and recognize cells that are in a very specific stage of cell division. And once it identifies that cell in cell division, then it's designed to kill that cell. And so understanding what the G phase is, what the M phase is, and that there are different phases, then you will understand kind of a little bit of how chemotherapy is working. And so going back to cancer development, cancer development is going to occur because of alterations that occur in the cell signaling. And that's going to control the entry and the exit from the cell cycle, as well as different things that are going to be needed within that cell cycle to allow that cell to progress. So a normal cell, a normal healthy cell is going to have checkpoints along the way that are kind of designed to make sure that there's not been any errors that have occurred as that cell has gone through the different cell cycles. And what happens with cancer is that these checkpoints don't function the way that they're supposed to. And so in a normal healthy cell, as the cell is going through a checkpoint, if it realizes, hey, there's been a damage here to this DNA, we better do something about it. That checkpoint is designed to catch that damage that has occurred and then it's designed to kill that cell. So apoptosis happens, and apoptosis is basically a programmed cell death where that cell is going to die, and that kind of prevents it from replicating further out of control. Well, in a cancer cell, apoptosis doesn't happen. And so that damage to the DNA kind of evades that checkpoint that happens. And because it evades that checkpoint, when that cell should have been programmed to die, it doesn't die. And instead, it just starts to replicate out of control. And that's where we see the problems that we do with cancer and cancer development. So there's 4 phases of cancer cell development. So we're going to go through each one of these just relatively quickly. But the first phase is initiation. This is when the DNA damage occurs. Then we have promotion. This is when we see the increased cell division that happens. Progression is when we see more genetic changes happening within that cell. And then finally, malignancy, and that's when the invasion happens. And with invasion, what we mean is a malignant cancer cell has the ability to grow into that tissue of origin. So if you have a malignant cancer cell in your liver, when invasion happens, that tumor that develops is growing into the liver or into whatever the primary tissue of origin is. The problem with that is when it grows into that tissue, it stops that tissue from being able to function the way that it should. And so, if you have a tumor that's growing in the lungs, that's going to really impede that individual's ability to breathe. They're going to have shortness of breath, they're going to have wheezing, they're going to have coughing, because that tumor is going to be taking up space and not allowing that tissue to function the way that it should. So that's really the danger that's associated with cancer. So just looking at each of these phases just a little bit more closely, when we talk about initiation is basically that process when you have a normal cell and some kind of DNA happens, either as a result of genetics or as a result of exposure to a carcinogen. And now, because of that, that cell is going to start down this path towards becoming a cancer cell. So a carcinogen then is just a substance or a type of exposure that can cause cancer in living tissue. So it's important to know that, yes, there are carcinogens. And I think we're hearing a lot about this, especially if you're here in the States and, you've been paying attention to RFK and some of the things that he's saying about the foods and the substances that are in our foods. And, I think that there's a heightened alert right now that, there's all these carcinogens in our food. And yes, that is dangerous. And that's definitely something that we want to be aware of and paying attention to. But not all carcinogens are going to cause cancer right on exposure. That extent of exposure, so how long you were exposed to that exposure, is going to be really, really critical. So in other words, if you've had one piece of food with one carcinogen that now is going to be, taken out of our food, I don't want you living in fear that, this is going to turn into cancer because of this one instance that I had. Really, it's that exposure over a long period of time that's going to be really critical. So one is not bad, but every day, having a whole bunch of it, that's when you can start to see the damage to the DNA that can lead to cancer growth. So I think that's important to kind of point out that it sometimes the extent that you're exposed to a carcinogen is really going to enhance the likelihood that it will then cause cancer. And so other factors that come into play here is, of course, length of exposure, how many carcinogens are present, and then what is the genetic backdrop in an individual. And you're hearing more and more about the importance of genetic testing. And I think that that's so important because you do sometimes have genetic abnormalities that are present in families where, I can think of several families where all the women have breast cancer, and then they go through genetic testing and they find out, well, they have this BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene mutation, and that has led to cancer development. So sometimes you can have a gene mutation, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's definitive that you're going to get cancer, but it does mean that you're probably at a higher risk for developing a certain type of cancer. And then you get to decide, what does that mean for you? Sometimes when women have the BRCA1 or BRCA2 gene mutations, they opt for a prophylactic mastectomy just to reduce the likelihood that they'll get breast cancer. So they'll get a mastectomy before they're actually diagnosed with breast cancer. And again, that's just removing that tissue to ideally reduce the likelihood that they'll develop breast cancer because they have the gene mutation for that. So that genetic backdrop in an individual is going to be really important. And then, of course, the microenvironment of the tumor, which we'll look at a little bit here today, is also going to be really important. So what's going on with that cell? That is it going to make that cell more likely to develop into cancer, or is it going to be an environment that's not necessarily hospitable to cancer? And so all of those factors are going to come into play when exposed to a particular carcinogen that could potentially cause cancer. So when you have these alterations in the DNA of the cell, that is what's going to initiate the process of cancer. So again, you have DNA, that DNA has been damaged as a result of a carcinogen or a genetic abnormality. It evades that checkpoint. So instead of then that cell dying, it evades that, and then that cell begins to divide out of control. Step two is now this error that happened in DNA is passed on. So this is the promotion. This is the expansion and replication of these cells that have had damage caused to them. And there are certain things that we can ingest in our body or be exposed to that can initiate tumor proliferation. So it can make it where this environment that the tumor is in is going to be more likely to grow. And so we know, due to research, we know that alcohol consumption is something that can be a tumor promoter. So, it can increase the likelihood that the cell with the damaged DNA is going to then promote into a tumor. Smoking is another thing that can cause tumor promotion. Elevated estrogen levels can lead to that. Your dietary fat, particularly, if you have sources coming from trans fatty acids, that oftentimes can lead to tumor growth. Exposure to UV light, and then of course exposures to certain chemicals. Those are all things that are considered tumor promoters. Another thing that can cause tumor promotion is oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is just a condition where there is an excess of highly reactive oxygen species in comparison to antioxidants. And so, if you look at the ratio in the body from reactive oxygen species, which is oftentimes abbreviated ROS or ROS, compared to antioxidants, essentially antioxidants, the job of an antioxidant is to neutralize the reactive oxygen species. And so if you have more reactive oxygen species than you do antioxidants, then that's going to cause oxidative stress. And oxidative stress can cause a number of issues within the body, inflammation, it can decrease your immune function. There's a number of things that can happen. It can also become a tumor promoter if you have high levels of oxidation. Okay, everyone. I lost my internet there for a minute. I am so sorry. I'm on a hotspot on my phone, so hopefully it holds and I can finish. I'm very sorry about that. I think it's still recording, so I will just pick up where I left off. Just give me a second. So sorry about that. All right, here we go. Okay, let me lower this. Okay, sorry about that. Let's continue on. And so, whenever we talk about the tumor microenvironment and different things that are going to promote tumor growth or potentially stop tumor growth, there's a couple of different specific structures and proteins that we can look at. The first one is a protein called P13. This is a tumor suppressor gene. It's actually called the guardian of the genome. I've never been someone who was into like Star Wars or anything, but whenever I hear guardian of the genome, that's kind of what I think of as Star Wars. But P13 is a really important protein because it directly regulates the expression of hundreds of genes, and it plays a key role in controlling cell division and cell death. And so when cells experience stress that could lead to cancer, so whether it's oxidative stress or damage to the DNA or a carcinogen that it's been exposed to, we naturally see our levels of P13 increase. And when P13 increase, what that causes is a slowdown of cell division. So it kind of slows down that cancer cell from dividing, which is really, really important. And then it also can trigger cell death as a protective measure. So P13 is really helpful in our bodies as a natural defense against the development of cancer. So then you might be thinking, well, then why do people get cancer if we have P13 here to help protect it? To 50% of human cancers is a mutation with this P53 protein. And so when P53 is not working properly, then we get two major problems that occur. One of those problems is that the cells begin to divide uncontrollably. And another problem is that RNA in molecules that normally kind of help stop the excess growth then become disrupted. Moving to another area of my house because I think my internet is spotty.
Oh. Spell your tweet.
Okay. If you have just joined, if you wouldn't mind muting yourself, just so we don't hear everything. Okay, there we go. Let me go back one. There we go. Okay, so with tumor growth, another thing that we oftentimes see is like we can study the rate of tumor growth. And so we can use two different things to study the rate of tumor growth. The first is observation, so simply watching it, looking at what is the time for that tumor to double in volume. And the one thing that we know about observation of tumor growth is that this is going to range depending on the type of cell and where in the body this happens. So it ranges anywhere from 27 to 83 days. And when we say 27 to 83 days, what we're talking about is the doubling size. So how long does it take for this tumor to double in size? We notice doubling more when the tumor is larger, but it's important to keep in mind that the rate isn't changing when the tumor's bigger. That rate stays consistent. We just notice it more when the tumor is larger. And the rate of proliferation is going to vary depending on the type of tissue. So we just naturally have some cells in our body that divide much, much faster than others. So for example, you have red blood cells, which take about 4 months to divide, where white blood cells oftentimes are going to take more than a year to divide. And so because we have this difference between certain cells in the body, that really explains why some tissues are so adversely affected by chemotherapy. And one of the things we haven't talked about in here is the fact that, the way that chemotherapy works is you put chemotherapy in the body, and it's designed to find cells that are in a specific stage of cell division, and it goes into that cell and it damages the DNA of that cell. So it stops that cell from replicating. But it doesn't know the difference between a healthy cell and a cancer cell. It's just programmed to say, for example, any cell that's in the G1 stage of cell division, that chemotherapy is going to find it, it's going to intercalate the DNA, and it's going to prevent that cell from dividing. Because it can't tell the difference between a healthy cell and a cancer cell, that's why we see so many side effects with chemotherapy. And that's why a lot of these side effects are around cells that replicate so fast, because this rate of proliferation, it differs from one tissue to the next. And so if you have hair follicles, you see a rapid proliferation of those cells. And so that's why your hair falls out when you get chemotherapy, because your chemotherapy doesn't know that that hair cell is a healthy cell. It just finds that cell in that specific stage of division and stops it from replicating. So any cell that's going to replicate quickly is going to be adversely affected by the chemotherapy. The tumor microenvironment, we've talked a little bit about this tonight. The tumor microenvironment really is referring to that ecosystem that surrounds the tumor in the body. And so it takes into consideration things like immune system constituents, other cancer cells that may be available or around, the vasculature. So is there a blood supply to that tumor? How strong is that blood supply? Oftentimes tumors will develop their own blood supply, but that blood supply can contain some leaky and really weak vessels. And so the vasculature is going to be really important. The leakier and the less good the structure is of the vasculature, then the more aggressive that tumor becomes. And so when you look at lifestyle habits like exercising, we know that exercise can improve the vasculature and it can make much stronger blood vessels. And that makes it much easier for chemotherapy and other medications to reach that tumor, and then makes that person more likely to be able to go into remission from their cancer. So definitely we see that lifestyle habits can contribute to, or they can inhibit the development and the progress of tumor. And then that tumor's likelihood to metastasize throughout the body. When we talk about things like tumor promotion is the process by which existing tumors are stimulated to grow. And so, it's important to keep in mind that a tumor promoter is not necessarily something that causes a tumor to grow or to form, but once that tumor is formed, then the tumor promoter kind of acts to speed the growth along. And so when we think of tumor promoters, we think of things like oxidative stress and inflammation, things that are going to make that environment more likely for that tumor to grow. And again, you can see here where lifestyle factors definitely come into play then with tumor promotion and the growth of that tumor. There are things that we can do to help slow this process. Maybe not prevent this process, but definitely slow the process. Angiogenesis is another thing that's really important. And I talked about this a little bit earlier here, that vasculature of the tumor. The tumor needs a blood supply, and it's going to use that blood supply to get nutrients so that it can grow. And oftentimes what we see with tumors is the development of immature blood vessels. And what we mean by immature blood vessels these are going to be blood vessels that are leaky, that are disorganized, that have a poor oxygen delivery. So oftentimes we'll see hypoxia develop in that tumor. When that happens, that actually promotes tumor aggressiveness. And so that tumor is going to become aggressive. We don't want our tumors to be aggressive, but the lack of oxygen delivery and the leaky, disorganized vessels are going to cause that. We also see a reduction in treatment effectiveness because you have these weak blood vessels that are being used to carry medication to the tumor. Well, if it's weak and if it's leaky and there's not enough oxygen delivery to that tumor, it's not going to effectively be able to deliver medicine to that tumor as well. And so one of the hallmarks with exercise is it's going to normalize the vasculature of the tumor. And that is so important because when you have a normalized vasculature to that tumor, that allows for the chemotherapy to be delivered more effectively. And it also can lead to a reduction in tumor size. So you see a smaller tumor as a result. You also see less aggressive tumors as a result. So exercise at a cellular level here, you can see the direct impact that it can have on tumor growth and the vasculature around that tumor. Whenever we talk about metastasis, we're talking about the spread of the tumor. And so essentially you have a tumor that has set up in a primary tissue, and then it's going to spread to somewhere else in the body. So it's discontinuous from that primary tumor. This is what's going to mark a tumor as being malignant, because when you have a benign tumor, they're incapable of spreading to distant sites. And so that's kind of the hallmark of a malignant tumor versus a benign tumor. But the way that metastasis works is you have invasion. So you have the direct extension and penetration by tumor cells into neighboring tissues. So this is going to enable non-cancerous cells to stop their proliferation and cell growth. And then it can contribute to the uncontrolled proliferation and solid tumor formation. And so, just as we saw before, you have the local tumor growth that happens, and this is in that primary tissue of origin. And then you see this breakthrough happens. And with stage 3, with breakthrough, what is happening is the membrane of that cell starts to break down, of that tissue. And in that tumor then can break through, and then it can invade into whether it's a lymphatic vessel or a blood vessel. It can invade into that and then use that kind of as a superhighway to travel then into other areas in the body. And it can then invade another tissue and set up a secondary tumor there. And so, our body does have, in addition to the P53 protein that we talked about earlier, we do have other things that are in our body that can help to prevent and fight cancer. And one of those things is with our immune system. And so our immune system can work with us to prevent and fight cancer. The hallmark of cancer then are cells that have evaded the immune system. And so when you look at the tumor microenvironment, oftentimes what you see is this ongoing battle happening between the immune system, which is seeking to eliminate the cancer, and then the tumor, which is seeking to evade the immune system so that it can continue proliferating. So there's this balance that happens. And then whenever we think of exercise, we know that low to moderate exercise can help enhance our immune system. So that can help to, with the tumor immunology, it can help to, help our body to fight that tumor. And so when we're looking at tumor immunology, essentially there's 3 phases to this. You have the elimination phase. That's when the immune system works to recognize and destroy developing tumors before they become clinically apparent. So, they recognize when there's been a DNA damage, they recognize when there's a microenvironment that is conducive to tumor growth. And it works to then destroy the tumors before it becomes anything significant. Cells that, cancerous cells that evade this and are able to continue proliferating on, then we move on to stage 2, which is the equilibrium phase. And in the equilibrium stage, the residual tumor cells that are not destroyed in the elimination phase then increase their genetic instability. And they're continuing to grow and to divide. And the immune system is also kind of working at the same time, trying to kill these tumor cells still. And then we move into the last phase, which is the escape phase. And these are when genetic changes occur in the tumor that allow it to actually evade the immune system response. And that's when we see the cell grow and, the tumor growing and potentially spreading throughout the body. We can also get cancers from viruses. And so viruses contribute to about 20% of all cancer cases worldwide. They act in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they can act as a direct carcinogen and contribute to the transformation of cancer cells. Sometimes they can act as indirect carcinogens through chronic infection and inflammation, leading to mutations that are carcinogenic. We do have some, potential vaccines that can help to prevent the spread of viruses that can potentially lead to cancer. So, we have the HPV vaccine that is given to help, ideally prevent cervical cancer down the road. So we have different viruses that can cause cancer and some vaccines that can help prevent that. When we're looking at tumor heterogeneity, essentially one of the challenges that we often see in treating cancer is that cancers are going to vary between patients and within patients. And so differences in gene expression, differences in the pathophysiology of the individual, molecular features, the tumor aggressiveness and its sensitivity to treatment, those are all going to vary, sometimes within the same person and definitely between two people. So if you have two people with the exact same type of cancer, they're not going to respond to treatment the exact same way. You may have one person that responds well to that treatment and they're able to, go into remission and into survivorship. And then you might have someone else with the exact same tumor and treatment has failed in that person. And that's because of the differences that we have each individually inside of our body. And if you've ever had the opportunity to sit in a tumor board, when you have all these physicians and nurses and social workers and the whole oncology care team looking at individual cases, they do try to take into consideration all of these factors. What is the medical history of the patient? What is the pathophysiology of the tumor that they have? How aggressive is it? How sensitive do we think it will be to the treatment? And they use all of those factors to determine what is going to be the best course of treatment for that person, because there are such differences as you go from one individual to the next. So it's important to keep in mind that sometimes someone can have what seems like a very dire diagnosis, but the tumor responds well because of these things inside the body are going to be more conducive to that treatment. And then you have the flip side. One of the I think saddest cases that we ever had with one of our patients was there was a 38-year-old marathon runner who got stage 4 colon cancer. And not only was she a marathon runner, but she was a vegan. She ate a whole foods, plant-based diet, was very overall healthy otherwise. And she got stage 4 colon cancer and passed away at the age of 38. And you look at that case and you're like, she checked all these boxes. Why did that happen for her when other people can survive the same type of cancer that maybe appear less healthy? And that's because of this tumor heterogeneity. It's not going to be the same from one person to the next. And you never know what's kind of going on a molecular level. So the role of exercise, how does exercise impact this? We've already talked a little bit on a molecular level, how exercise can help, whether it's reducing inflammation or the creation of antioxidants or, the maturing of the vasculature around the tumor. So there is a lot of things that exercise can do when someone has cancer on a molecular level to make that person, that body more conducive to fighting that cancer. We also know that exercise has the capability to interrupt the process of developing cancer, as well as addressing some of the symptoms and the side effects of treatment. And so if you joined us last week and you were able to see that first webinar that we did, we really looked closely at the different side effects that happen when someone is battling cancer, whether it's muscle weakness, whether it's cardiotoxicity or low energy levels. And we looked at, what is happening? How can exercise help to alleviate some of these symptoms? So exercise really does play a very important role in the treatment of cancer that goes so far beyond, it's just makes you feel better or gives you more energy. Of course, energy is very important, especially when you're battling cancer. But these are changes and things that are happening at a molecular level, which is why we're so passionate about making exercise part of the standard of care. Because when you combine exercise with these traditional treatments, there is so much data now that shows improved patient outcomes as a result, because as you can see on a molecular level, patients are going to see these positive changes. So that is all that we had today. I apologize first about all of the disruptions with my internet and with my dog barking. I apologize for that. But I think, like I said in the very beginning, I think it's really important to understand what is happening on a molecular level when someone gets cancer, when someone's fighting cancer, because then the next step is to see, okay, with that understanding as our foundation, let's look at the role of exercise and how do we safely prescribe exercise to someone who's battling cancer, and what are the effects that we should expect to see, and then how do we elevate ourselves so that we are a part of the healthcare team And you know, we can help share these results and encourage more patients to exercise. And so I hope that you found that helpful. Like I said, we will send out this recording. I'm going to stop recording.